Hello and welcome to this spoiler-filled deep dive discussion of the 2021 AMC Plus movie, Silent Night. Again, this is full of spoilers. I'm just going to be talking very freely about this movie, so if you haven't seen it yet, please stop now. Alright, warning done. I really generally enjoyed this movie, and it really kind of took me by surprise. When I first had it kind of lined up, I saw the first sentence or two of a fairly general synopsis of a family gets together and then starts dying. And I'm really glad that I didn't see any more than that, because it was really a genuine joy in its own kind of weird, morbid way to watch it unfold as it did. I remember as I was watching this, the kind of peculiar eccentricities that were taking place, and they were all enough to make a mental note for me, but not enough to actually give me any kind of clear picture of what was going on, or even that those little details were significant in any way. The things about letting the chickens out so that it's better if the foxes get to them. I'm like, well, all right. The breaking into the gas station thing, the fact that the guys actually tossed the club back in their car when they were coming back from it and said that that was fun. I thought, well, geez, okay. I thought it was just kind of the odd eccentricities of a privileged family kind of thing. I thought it was just trying to add a little bit of a humorous element to things, and it turned out to be more sinister than that. The notion that there were only enough, like potatoes for one each, and they didn't have a lot of food supplies and such. I thought that, again, that was the kind of thing where it triggered a little bit of a mental, well, that's interesting, that's peculiar, that's unique, but not enough to actually say that's an element of what they're actually going to be revealing later. So when it did start revealing it later, I started to think back about all those little bullet points, those little breadcrumbs that they laid on the trail that I didn't even recognize were breadcrumbs in the first place, and I loved that. When things started unfolding towards the end of Act 1 and we got introduced to the notion of this poisonous gas cloud and the death pill, I hate to put it this way, but it was a joy. I mean, prior to that, I was really thinking that this family was really insufferable, and I was actually kind of hating the movie on a very real level because of that. There was just terrible characters acting terribly. And that's not to say that they weren't. I think it just added a little bit more depth and context. And as we got introduced to the situation, we also started to break through that shell of these characters and started to kind of get introduced to more subtle nuances under them. They started to kind of reveal their humanity as they were facing their mortality closer and closer. That's not to say that they completely had a redemption character arc kind of thing. I think that would have felt a little cheap, but it was interesting seeing beyond the surface just a little bit further. And when we have extreme circumstances such as this brought to life in fiction, it's interesting to kind of see the levels of humanity and the levels of character that kind of get brought forth in the natural circumstances of these terrible events. That's not to say that I didn't have any faults with this movie. I did, and honestly, for me, this movie was surprisingly deep and surprisingly emotional up until literally the very last second. Now, it's very easy to attribute a lot of the subtext to this film and kind of give it modern context. Apparently, the context was supposed to have been kind of the Brexit thing, since from what I'm reading, a lot of the principal photography was already shot before the first COVID lockdown in the UK, and some pickup shots were kind of happened between then and now. But even though the subtext was supposed to be more about Brexit, I honestly couldn't help but, as I was watching it and before I looked up some trivia about it, I couldn't help but draw a lot of parallels with COVID and the lockdowns and the vaccines, and honestly, that's what I thought was the subtext. We had the kid that was obstinate and refusing the humane treatment and so forth, that he was basically saying, who are you going to believe? The government? Basically refusing to know that right outside the window is this inescapable, unseen force that there is a government response for, albeit in this case, euthanization. So again, for me, it wasn't very difficult to draw a lot of parallels with the subtext and the modern context going on, even if it wasn't something that the filmmakers originally intended. So when the kid opened his fucking eyes. God, I hated that moment. I really did. Because it really betrayed a lot of what they had already established, a lot of the groundwork. Yeah, it added a bit of a Black Mirror, little jab in the side kind of thing. But was it really that necessary, especially in the current times that we're in, that this kid that was constantly contrarian, constantly, who are you going to believe, the government, constantly saying that maybe this thing isn't as bad as we're being told, all of a sudden gets proven right. And then I was kind of fighting with myself, well, maybe he's a zombie, but that just seems like rationalization. Even taking all of that and just putting it off to the side, political, modern context, all of that, it's such a fucking tired cliche at this point. The movie resolves, everybody lies where they lie, the camera starts panning over the mayhem and the bodies and so forth until it finally settles on one. Eyelids open, end credits. It's just so fucking tired. I'm not going to say that it ruined the entire movie for me, but it really did felt cheap, and it felt like just this unnecessary little jab at itself that kind of undermined the entirety of the message that the previous hour and a half had established. I found myself emotionally invested in a way that when I was first watching it in the first 10 minutes, I did not think would happen. As we're watching the gas cloud roll through the streets as a singular voice is singing Silent Night, I found myself misting up. It was somber. It was emotional. It was something that I was invested in at that point, and nobody was more surprised about that than me. And yes, it kind of kept a little bit of a melancholia tone throughout, as well as some subtle bits of satirical humor and so forth. But I think that was in keeping with the rest of the movie, even towards the end. So the notion of the dad having to constantly go back and forth to appease his fucking kids about their cokes. It felt right. It felt natural. It felt like we had this privileged family that was kind of abhorrent in its own weird way, even though we did get to see more of their humanity. They couldn't betray who they were at their core, which was essentially spoiled brats. So all of that was fine, and all of that was in keeping with what the film had already given us, but that last second of the film really felt like a betrayal to me. So I think that that's generally what I wanted to talk about with the 2021 movie Silent Night. Thank you so much for joining me. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. If you agree or disagree or have ideas or notions or opinions of your own, I would love to hear that in the comments below. Remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.